I don't really think we talked about a topic, so we're just gonna have a really cool conversation and let it flow from whatever you guys want to talk about. But this is everybody who watches my show knows who Jamie Peck is. Longtime Majority Report alum, has a show called The Antifada and Everybody Loves Communism. Big, involved in socialist organizing in New York. Friend of mine, all in all, cool person. And we also, I don't think we've ever met.
Not in person, no.
No.
You gotta come to New York sometime.
Yeah, we have to do that.
I'm throwing shows again. You should come for Halloween or something.
I went to a bunch of Michael's shows, but I don't think you were there.
Oh, I'm doing music shows too.
Oh, true. Yeah, cool. All right.
Yeah.
And is it George? Or
Jorge.
Jorge. That's what I went with because I'm the most Anglo person that's ever existed. I think when I was born, they stamped Anglo on me. Anyway, Jorge, you are the host of so Everybody Loves Communism is your guys' new project, right?
Correct.
And you are also, I've heard of Line Goes Down before. So why don't you both introduce yourselves and take anything that I left out. And why don't we start, Jamie? Why don't you start?
No, that was a very good introduction. I'm still blushing, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, since I didn't get everything wrong, Jorge, why don't you?
I mean, the only thing I would add is that I'm working on a book proposal right now.
It's true.
I've not sold the book yet, but I have an agent and I'm really excited to be working on that.
All right, Jorge, what about you? Why don't you, what did I leave out? What do I need to know about you and my audience as well?
Yeah, sure. So the only thing that should be that was left out was how Jamie and I, we met through DSA. I'm also organizer in DSA and we're part of the same caucus known as Emerge.
Yeah, and we're also in a Capital reading group together and we just finished volume 1.
That's correct. We finished it actually this past Tuesday. Funny enough, it was the anniversary of Capital Volume 1 being published.
Can I get some capitals in the chat?
Can we get some capitals?
Pew,
Yeah.
pew, 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 pew.
Yeah, so that's always a transformative experience when you get through it the first time. I had the benefit of doing so in an academic setting where I had the discipline of, okay, you've got to do it. You've got to read this. And it's not to say that there are parts of it that are a fun read, but there's other parts of it where it's like, why is this the thing?
Oh, someone's asking in the chat what happened to Aaron. Aaron had to, unfortunately, take an indefinite leave of absence from the project to deal with some personal issues, but he really wanted me to keep the show going, and I wanted to keep the project going. So I am keeping it going with Jorge, with Aaron's blessing, but maybe he'll be able to come back someday. We don't know.
He's always welcome to come back.
That's great. All right. Well, I think everybody. Well, don't worry. The mods are going to work on spamming your things, and you'll get plenty of love, I'm sure. All right. So I have some things we can. I'm sure you guys have takes that you can fire off the hip on some of the stuff that's happening right now. One of the stories that I just covered before you came on was the Nabisco strike and the organizing happening up in Buffalo for Starbucks. And overall, kind of the idea of a revived organized labor movement. Since you're both so involved in DSA, what have you guys been involved at, supporting that at all? And what do you think about the prospects for the labor going forward in this country? Any thoughts?
Big question. Sean's going to cover this stuff later today, actually, on the Antifada Twitch stream. I unfortunately have not been that involved in labor organizing to date, but, DSA is always pretty good about sending people to support on picket lines. And, there are some campaigns that DSA members have been directly involved with as workers. So that's cool. I mean, I don't see how we're going to build working class power from what it is right now, which is very low, without some form of union movement. I certainly have my little leftcom critiques trade unionism as a route to, doing the thing. But yeah, like you got to do it.
Yeah, I think it's important that, yeah, similar with Jamie, I'm not as involved with labor organizing as much as I would be. Pretty much the majority of my organizing in DSA has been in political education, so no surprise I'm involved in this podcast, but also involved in like abolition organizing. So unfortunately, not as involved in labor organizing as I would hope so. But what is remarkable about particularly the Nabisco, but also the Starbucks Buffalo union organizing is that it's very symptomatic of where like really a growing, not as much as we should be, but growing militant labor union organizing in this country. I mean, like
right.
I think what really is, it's been like a month now with Nabisco. Like that's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I tend to be on the side of the importance of this labor organizing is extremely high is it's not just about the specific demands that is made in a specific group of workers with a specific firm. It's about a larger like cultural conversation. It's a larger like momentum that's gained for the movement everywhere. And it's also like within those group of workers and their communities, there's also like a new conversation that's based on class power and its conflict. There is a distinction between management and ownership and workers, and they produce the value, and it's automatic. Like no matter whether you know about Marxism or labor theory of value or not, that's the way that these organizations operate. That's the actual way they interact with the negotiations, which is, hey, you don't want to pay us proper wages, then we're just not going to make your cookies. And the management, they don't know how to make the cookies. They don't do the work. So the business comes to a halt. And then and then the necessity of political education and agitation and solidarity, all of a sudden, all those things naturally arise. And you start saying like, hey, what is a class trader? People crossing the picket line, people working as replacement workers, and all the class conflict that we as socialists want to increase and expose naturally is the result of it. So you could call me a very pro-trade unionist person, but when I see this stuff happening, and there's going to be a lot of failures, it's still part of this larger like ecosystem that has to change. And politically, it puts these topics of conversation necessarily at the forefront, which, American news doesn't typically cover in these kinds of terms. They want to talk about the dress and
oh my God.
I think maybe that's a good topic, because I'm sure you guys have hot takes on this, and maybe we can have a debate on this, or not a debate, a discussion on this one.
I think our takes are both pretty nuanced, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Everything you're saying about unions, like it used to be that every major newspaper had at least one reporter covering trade unions and union activity, and they don't now, but maybe they will again. Like I'm reading right now this story in Willamette Week about the Nabisco strike. It's getting very confrontational. I mean, you probably covered this already, but the company sent a cease and desist to the strikers, warning that they were going to get sued if they didn't stop interfering with plant operations. One of which I'm so tired. One way they did that was to block the actual trains coming in and out of the factory to carry the supplies. So, it almost feels like a throwback in a way, because all anyone wants to talk about in this day and age is the gig economy and how hard it is to organize workers in that kind of circumstance where they're all atomized in their own houses or in their cars, or, running around the city delivering food to people, and they can't talk to each other. But there still are a lot of shop floors, a lot of traditional shop floors left in the country, and certainly in the world, where these traditional methods like, blocking a train that people were doing 100 years ago could still work.
Right.
Yeah. I think militant, this is part of why law is important, is, a lot of the most militant labor tactics are illegal. in the U.S. And if they're not illegal in other places. And if you do them, your union president will get arrested. And that kind of tamps down on the militancy. But when you have these new organizations, or you have a grassroots led movement, sort of like, the Red State Rebellion, we've talked about this before, Jamie, in West Virginia and Oklahoma, where the teachers kind of did wildcat strikes. It doesn't matter if what they're doing is illegal. You can't arrest them all. And you need teachers to teach. As we're learning with COVID-19, when you don't have an education system, you don't have that childcare, the built-in childcare, the economy grinds to a halt. So yeah, that seems pretty important. The dress is kind of it's a piece of candy, I guess. It's dumb content, but at the same time, it's not, because like this is dominating. So many people want to talk about her dress and not the Nabisco strike, right? Like that's just the way conversations are in our culture. What was your guys' take on the AOC wearing Tax the Rich dress at the Met Gala?
Oh man, who wants to go first? I'll let you go first, Jorge. I think we both have a lot of nuanced thoughts on it. I wouldn't call it a hot take, maybe like a cool taking your time take.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the, I remember when it was happening, I didn't really want to comment on that, because I feel like it was one of those things where it definitely demonstrated a lot in terms of your own kind of politics, in terms of what you looked into and what you got out of it, if that makes any sense, because of the fact that
I agree.
It's someone said something that, if you're a liberal, you're like someone on the left, like that kind of how much you took away from the dress discourse kind of like demonstrated something. But the fact of the matter is that how do I put it? Like there is a hold on, give me 1 second, be right back.
Yeah, sure. I'll pick up with I'll have the most lib take of this by far. This is where my lib tendencies come in, which is basically this. I think a lot of people on the left kind of assume the sale, and they think like, hey, the concept of like taxing the rich, that's already kind of popular and people agree with that, and you're kind of that's liberalism. You're not really attacking the structures of society in a significant way. It's not a real challenge to power. The Met Gala itself is liberalism. It's terrible because it's the rich and powerful, and they're controlling culture, which is literally an art museum, and fashion. It's all being structured around the needs of the powerful, and all that is 100% true. I agree with all that. However, where I don't agree is the sale is not sold. Tax the rich, for many normies, is attacking structures. It is a conversation starter. It is kind of a reflection. It's a disruption of what the Met Gala is typically doing in our culture, which is a celebration of wealth, a celebration of excess, a celebration of capital, a celebration of the hierarchy. And AOC is a part of that, 100%. But when she did that, it's something that reached into spaces that were not political, or at least not explicitly political, I guess is a better way of putting it, and started a political conversation, especially with a group of people that is cringe for online leftists. But if you've ever done real organizing, they are very important. That is the wine mom. That is the recently retired 65-year-old woman. I can't tell you how many times that I've started organizing, say like on an ordinance for affordable housing or to protect a homeless encampment. And then the people that showed up were middle-aged women, were recently retired women on Social Security. They had the time, they had the energy, they were right there. And yeah, they were wine moms. They were upper middle class or middle class women that are not traditionally what you would think of as like a radical activist. And there they were. And to me, when you have a conversation that crosses those borders, there's value there. There's value in people talking about how tilted our society is. So I was like ambivalent toward the dress, but I didn't think that, AOC doing the Met Gala, wearing that dress was that big a deal. Sorry for the long rant, but that's my liberal position. Now rip it apart.
No worries at all. I mean, I'm sorry for kind of stop in the middle of what I was going to say because something happened.
Yeah, no
really
worries.
quickly.
Don't worry about it. It's a Twitch stream.
I
It's
live
okay.
with roommates, so it's just that's more what happened. But
No worries.
Regardless, I mean, look, like the nuanced take essentially for me that I had about the dress essentially is one is that it's kind of like this both take of like one. I somewhat agree with you in the sense that, it really did mean a lot to people in terms of having that message being there. Both my parents, I'm fortunate that they're in their 60s, but they were both, pro Bernie, pro AOC people. And, for them, it meant a lot, like the dress. And then people I know that they see like what AOC wore in terms of the dress. And, it was really, I thought they really liked it. A lot of people I know who are my age that, aren't to say truly that politically involved, but are definitely, on the left, they really like that idea. And, something I've mentioned to Jamie before is like, I think for us who are aware of that kind of like, we have our criticism and are aware of the fact that, she is in the ruling class as part of, a congresswoman and is a bourgeois politician, we should kind of have there is a limited utility in terms of really criticizing her using of the dress because of the fact that it means a lot to people, so it should be like a no, this is bad, rather it should be yes, tax the rich and talk about other things, because of the fact that
exactly
it's taxing the rich is not socialism. It's important to mention that is not a socialist mode of economy. However, that does need to happen, right? We're like, that we do need to talk about like kind of, all right, we address that, but it's also, we need to kind of talk about everything else on top of that. I personally, despite kind of having my own kind of, my communist politics, it's like, I am in favor of AOC. I am, if I wasn't at least somewhat, I wouldn't be in DSA. Right. And,
exactly.
And so, but, I think that's basically my nuanced take. It's basically, yes, there are issues with the fact that, if I thought of like what would be the better position, it'd be like, she should not have gone and rather, use that invitation to kind of, use like a wedge point and be part of the protest outside. But you can't,
the protest against the NYPD.
Right. But, it is what it is.
I think I agree with Jorge on many of these points. Like the fact that people got mad about it, people on the left, is just fucking ridiculous. AOC never claimed to be a communist. She's a social democrat at best. Sometimes she seems like more of a liberal. You can't be surprised when a liberal does liberal shit. Like taxing the rich is a big part of her platform. This is part of left liberalism. It's part of social democracy, whatever you want to call it. She's saying her message loud and clear in that context of, trying to get people interested in this topic because it's not a message for the people at the Met Ball. She understands how media works.
Right.
And she understands people are going to be talking about this around the water cooler the next day or, on Facebook or wherever wine moms talk about the outfits at the Met Ball. Yeah, to the degree that spreading a message works, I think it was effective in her left liberal social democratic context. I'm not mad because I never expected her to be, a communist like me. Like at best, she's a fellow traveler and, she's staying in her lane, which is, it's fine. It's fine. Does it matter that much in the grand scheme of things? In my opinion, no, not really. Where was I going with this? Yeah, rich liberals love to pay taxes. I don't think it was really threatening in any way to the people at the Met Ball, to the power structures, the powers that be. But like without an organic connection to any kind of working class movement or party, anything she might have said or done at the Met Ball or outside of it would be primarily performative. Because
well, I think that's such a good point. Like, there's nothing wrong with performativity. There's nothing wrong with a performance or making a statement. There isn't. That's how we convince people of things. However, if that's the sum total of what you're doing,
the age of spectacle,
then it's useless and like
totally subsumed by this the capitalist spectacle, which is pretty much every image that comes into our eye holes these days.
Exactly. And like, it's funny, my mom talked to me about it. This is
Yeah,
why I
mine
had it.
too.
This is why I had
My mom fucking loved it.
See, this is why I kind of
mine as
had a
well.
different take as a lot of other. And like for me, I look at it like this. You know, Bernie Sanders, AOC right now, they're trying to get concessions. There's literally a social democratic moment happening right now where they are trying to change the terms of how much capital gives to labor as we speak.
Yeah.
And is it everything? No, there's some stuff there, you know, and that is worth talking about. I think it's worth talking about people getting dental coverage and hearing aids and eyeglasses and the Bernie Sanders idea of wringing what we can out of the moment that we're in. And they're trying to raise taxes on the rich. They are, you know, is it a wholesale, you know, expropriation? Are we seizing the means? No, we're not. We aren't. We're not at that moment. We don't have the movement for that, but there is something happening. So when she says tax the rich, it's actually not purely a performative. It's also a like, hey, at this moment, we're kind of trying to raise taxes on the rich. And, you know, she's a social democrat. Her and the squad are the reason why we're not just going to say sell off all public land right now. You know, I think that has value. You know, I live in this society. I live under whatever capitalist rules are imposed upon me. And if they're slightly better, especially for my parents that are nearing 65, they're going to need those eyeglasses. They're going to need those hearing aids. You know, I would want that coverage to actually happen. So, you know, that's kind of how I feel. And, you know, I am somebody who is very comfortable talking about these concessions, and I think they have value. Other people who are on the left, you know, they don't. They're not as interested as I am in this stuff. But
Well, I think they certainly have value. But I don't know. I think, you know, they're all doing their best, AOC and the squad, right? Bernie did his best to sort of reverse engineer a movement from an electoral campaign when we know that that's usually the other way around is how it actually works. They're all trying their best. That said, I think it is a mistake to believe that you can get these social democratic reforms like what we saw in the New Deal, like what we saw in the Great Society, in a top-down technocratic way, which is why all these conversations, which is why all these conversations about persuading the ruling class or getting the message out to wine moms, like I think are a little bit beside the point, right? Like the New Deal wasn't
It's fundamentally
something...
liberal.
Yes, it is. It 100% is. Yes.
It's yeah, and even beyond like the categories of what it is, I just think it's very ineffective, right? Like, how do we get the New Deal? It wasn't that we elected some competent managers who decided to bestow upon the poor and the working class, and maybe so the economy would just start working better again. These like smart, you know, technocratically approved policies. No, like we had a mass movement. We had unions full of communists and anarchists in this country who were doing class struggle. And what happened then? The AFL-CIO made a deal with the powers that be to purge the communists from among their midst. And those things, that's how we got those things as concessions in a larger class war. They don't have that bargaining chip right now. We don't have a strong union movement full of communists and anarchists who want to seize the means of production. So I don't know how far they're really going to get. Like, it's admirable that they're trying, because what the fuck else can they do as bourgeois politicians? But I'm sorry if I'm a little bit skeptical that that's going to work, because that's not how we got anything in the past. Also, like the idea that we need to persuade the ruling class, that's how we get things. Like, I don't think those upper class wine moms are going to do direct action. Sorry. Like, the best they'll do is they'll like vote for an AOC style candidate.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. Well, first of all, like when you go back in history, which I think all of us, you know, as leftists have to do, because, you know, neoliberalism so thoroughly destroyed what had been built up. When you go back in history, there is a period where they tried this specific... you know, it's funny because we just have to do the same thing over again and experience what happened. You know, the Knights of Labor, when the labor movement really first started in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, they tried this kind of utopian, like, hey, maybe the mine owner doesn't know that the mines are unsafe. You know, if we just go in with reasonable information and we talk about how we're human beings and we want to make money for them and for us, they'll decide that they want to, like, pay us a living wage or put, you know, reinforcement in the mines, and, you know, they'll provide for miners who, you know, get crushed. And then they got the Pinkertons on them. Then they got fired. Then they got, they got the boot of, federal troops. And people started realizing, the ruling class is actually evil. The capitalists are fucking evil. They don't care about children dying in the coal mines. They don't care about the environment exploding. They take the money and run. And so they had to go through that radicalizing moment of like, but they had to try, because people don't like conflict, in my opinion.
Well,
and it's coming to you whether you like it or not, because capital wants more.
Yeah, I think the point's really interesting. I mean, like, I want to say just two things. One is that, what you just said, Mike, it just, whether or not you believe that there is class conflict or class warfare is irrelevant. It is happening. Whether it's just you, whether or not choosing to engage or defend or antagonize involved in it. Because like, it reminds me, there is class consciousness in this country, and it's the class consciousness of the bourgeoisie. They are very aware of what they need to do. It's like, I remember this New York Times op-ed or an interview that Warren Buffett gave. Like, I think it was 2014 or it was some point that was like way before. I think it was like 2008 or something, like before the financial crisis, 2008, 2006, where he made this mention of like, oh no, there is class warfare in this country. It's just that my side is winning. Yes. Like, he said that, and it's like it's there is no pretending. They know that this is what needs to happen. And the other point I wanted to mention though is like it's with respect to I totally slipped my mind, but we do need to kind of, I remember now. It was what you said about the capitalists are evil. That is true in terms of a lot of the actions that they take, but it's important to note that that is not necessarily what is motivating them. What I mean by that is like, these are just a fundamental way that the system is structured so that they have to continue and perpetuate their class position. They have to do this. It's not that, they want to have people die. It's just that they have to, that's like a side effect of what they need to do to maintain their position. Like, it's, something that when you read Marx, especially Capital, it's something that's quite, interesting, is that he doesn't really talk about capitalists for the most part in like these, good or bad kind of morality. He uses like, kind of views it like this, scientific way of like, they do this because they have to do X or Y in order to kind of get more surplus value because of the fundamental, logic of the system. And so it's really like, they just have to do that. And the thing is like, it's more than just they're bad people. It's just that they have to be.
Yeah. When I say they're evil, it's more rhetoric because,
Sure.
It's amplifying because all of us have this kind of kindergarten morality of reciprocity and not taking too many cookies, and making sure everybody gets a piece of cake. And, I have enough, so I want to make sure somebody else who's suffering is not suffering. Right. And capital is amoral. It is a grinding machine. It is scary if you have that kindergarten level of morality. If you just look at the machine of capital, it's going to make you intuitively disgusted. So I use that as like, I can attack capitalism because it's against what we all feel intuitively in our heart is right or wrong. And people, that resonates with people in my experience, more so than, and I love Marx because, understanding that Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world, not because he's evil, but because he's a capitalist. And capitalism does this horrific shit. And if he didn't do that, he wouldn't be the richest man in the world. Yeah. Someone else would be the richest man in the world. So he's the richest man in the world because he's doing that thing. So I think I'm comfortable calling Jeff Bezos evil because, he made that decision to do what capital tells him to do or what is necessary for his class. But he still has personal responsibility for what he does.
On the flip side, however, you have like someone like Bill Gates, right? Like, or like, these big philanthropists, right? Or, another example who's a capitalist, but not giving money away is like Elon Musk. People, not saying this audience, of course not, but, so there's a lot of people out there that like, they view them in a positive way because, they're doing good because they have this money and giving it away, or like, like Elon Musk is doing good because they're innovating. And it's like, even if you view that as like a moral good, that is still the problem is that they still are controlling the way the society operates. There is no input, and the way the world works is at their behest rather than the majority of the world, which is all of us that are workers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm really sick of seeing capitalist malfeasance framed in terms of greed. Maybe that was true in feudal times, right? Like you could have one particularly greedy lord who just wanted a lot of jewel encrusted Bibles or whatever, and another lord that's willing to live a bit more of an austere life so that the peasants in his fields could keep more grain for themselves. But in capitalism, like it's actually seen as a plus, as a bonus when capitalists live these austere lives, like Mark Zuckerberg having a simple house and doing boring shit on the weekend or whatever, because they're supposed to put everything back into the company, into the firm,
right?
So accumulation can continue. They are just they're just slaves to this. I mean, even capitalists don't have that much power in this situation. They're doing what they're compelled to do, which is to tend to this ever accumulating value that they're sitting on top of.
Yeah, no, absolutely great point, because every dollar you spend in consumption is not being spent in investment. So you have, an investment compounds, right? So, every year the percentage points, of the interest rate compound, and the more you put in last year, it results in a bigger outcome this year. So if you don't spend $100 million on a mansion or a yacht, you're actually a better capitalist than the ones who did. It just so happens that if you spend it all on, fictitious capital or investment speculation, there's no actual production happening in the real world. No one's even being paid to build that yacht or that house, and so you have it even more. The inequality grows even faster, and there's less value for like everyday human beings, and more is being sucked up into the maw, this alien that's taking over our society, which is capital. Yeah, one of the things about this like philanthropy that we were talking about is the Met Gala. That is Bill Gates, like all that stuff, but that's crumbs.
Yeah.
It's just PR. That doesn't fundamentally change something. If Elon Musk gives $1 million to starving children, that's not the same thing as a society.
It's like when you or I would give $1 to a homeless person. That's how much money that is for Elon Musk.
It's actually less.
Okay.
He has, I think he has, what's he at, like 90 billion now? So like,
no, it's over like almost 200 billion.
Wait, really?
Wow.
Went that high now?
No,
I mean,
Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos go in and out of being the richest people in the world.
Well, that is a COVID-19 pandemic. I haven't kept up with their exact number because the COVID-19 bubble has exploded even more then. Jesus Christ.
We looked at a graph the other day. I think maybe Jorge tweeted it and I retweeted it about the way that inequality has risen just since the pandemic, and the percentage of our GDP nationally controlled by the top 1%, 0.1% has gone up astronomically in the past 2 years.
What's also interesting,
I think the top 400 billionaires in America was like it's gone to the point where like it's an actual percentage point where it's like, things like maybe 10% of the whole entirety of the GDP, which is like quite concerning.
Well, no, I mean, so like this is the thing that, scares me if we're going to be doomers. Like, first of all, fascism is super advanced in our country at this point. I think this is something that a lot of people have a hard time admitting. Or they they don't take it that seriously. I personally think we're in extreme danger. Like all of us as leftists. Like I think we're like in danger because I don't know how much you guys watch the right or take it seriously, but they're fucking batshit.
No, we certainly keep an eye on them.
Yes.
I did an episode of the Antifada sort of defining what is fascism, because it still doesn't have a commonly agreed upon definition, even among people who study this stuff for a living. There's also a really good episode of Know Your Enemy, the podcast. That podcast? They focus on the right,
yes.
where they sort of go through what fascism means historically. Is Trump a fascist? And the answer in the end was a qualified no. But that doesn't mean that these people aren't dangerous. It doesn't mean we shouldn't keep an eye on them, especially because we know that fascism is capitalism in decay, and capitalism is certainly in a decadent period, to say the least.
I'm not. so the thing of the tax, whether or not we put something in a category that we call a certain thing, or whether it rises to the level, is not as important to me. And this is something that people love to spend a lot of time on. Like, for example, is Bernie Sanders a social democrat or a democratic socialist? Are democratic socialists really socialist? Like, those are categories that are important to talk about. But when we're describing these cultural phenomenon of like Donald Trump and the right, it's more like we are leaving a point of like liberal democracy and entering a point of fascist reaction. And I don't think that anyone could dispute that we're entering that phase, at least in the United States.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're also entering a very concerning phase of exterminism. We just went over this in Capital, actually, in our reading group, the really harsh laws they passed against being a vagabond or a landless peasant back in the day when they were switching over from feudalism to capitalism, just basically to force people to go to work for capitalists in the factories. They couldn't say, oh, fuck off, I don't want to work for you, because now, you've been dispossessed of your land, and if we catch you as a vagabond without a job, we're going to fucking draw and quarter you, or hang you on the third offense, or any number of these things. And this was an immense amount of violence that it took to bring capitalism into the world. I mean, we talk a lot about the everyday violence of the system, when people die from lack of health care, when people are killed. I mean, obviously, we can see how violent it is when people are killed by the police. But when people die because they don't have money, they don't have access to resources, they don't have clean water, we spend a lot of time trying to reframe that and make people think about that as violence. But if you go back to the beginning of capitalism, the violence was explicit. Like, it doesn't need to be explicit anymore, but it was. What we're seeing now is very concerning, because I think there are many parallels to what went on then. Homelessness is being criminalized once again to the degree that it hasn't been already. They just passed a law in California.
They just did in Austin as well, which is supposed to be the liberal bastion of Texas.
Yeah,
exactly. They did the same thing, which is
not surprising that liberals would do that. Not surprising to me, but
not surprising to me at all. Yeah,
scratch a liberal and a fascist leads. And they're drawing down all of these programs that were meant to help people out during the pandemic, because they're like, don't get too used to this. People's unemployment is being taken away. People's health care is being taken away. I myself am losing my coverage. I talk so much shit about Biden for covering Cobra and the Dems for covering Cobra, but like, I actually had that Cobra covered, and now that's being taken away. But to what end? Yeah, they're attempting to force people back into work at these shitty, low-paying, non-union jobs that really profit on the massive gulf between the averagely employed, who are not even doing that well themselves right now, and the way underemployed. They're trying to force people back into this economy, because that's how the economy exists now, so that it can keep on chugging along and keep on accumulating. But even with all these shitty gig service jobs, there is a secular drop in the demand for labor worldwide. That's what secular means. Then you have to ask yourself, do they actually even want to force people back into jobs working for capitalists, or are they just going to exterminate them? Are they just going to warehouse them in prisons? And we have, an exploding prison population in this country. Like, it starts to look very dark, and like the exterminist future. Have you read Peter Frase's Four Futures?
Yes, I recommend that book. Yeah, Peter Frase, The Four Futures.
Book.
It's definitely happening already.
Just to explain it to chat, basically Peter posits 4 different ways the world could go. And one of them is socialism, which he kind of describes as like a socialist future, but we're like limited by resources. Like, the carrying capacity of the earth is reached. And so we have to live a little bit of austerity, because that's just the math. But we do so in an equitable way, so everybody lives the most dignified life possible, right? Socialism.
Given everything.
Yeah. Communism is where we aren't near that, where there's actually a lot more abundant resources. We develop technology, but it's done so in an equitable way. We don't have hierarchy. We go to the communist future that Marx envisioned, basically, where we have hyperabundance. And then there are two alternate strategies, which is the past. I think we're between these two. I think we're getting elements of both, which is exterminationism, which is we come up to a hard limit in the earth, and the rich and the powerful and the hierarchies basically exterminate the poor, the excess population on the earth, and they maintain their own wealth and power.
And not just the earth, but capitalism itself. Like, I think the number of jobs, the way the economy functions, capitalism is caving it on itself, whether or not the earth is okay.
Right. And then there is this rentierism, which is like there's a lot of resources in the earth, but we just like say we invent an AI, but the AI is used to trade stocks, and Elon Musk owns the AI, and now he owns all of the world. Right? It doesn't matter that we have this amazing AI technology. It doesn't matter that we have these robots that can replace manual labor. The value of that is all going to the rich.
I think a good example of that world, I think, is like in season 1 of Black Mirror, like the one where like I think Daniel Kaluuya is like in that episode where it's like he has to use points to pay for everything, like opening the door, like things like that. I forget the episode, but it's like I think that's a good example of a rentier's future.
Yeah. So,
and we see that because, you know, just to close this category out, but there's like, you know, you can start to see the propaganda for that future where it's like you will own nothing, but you'll love it. That's a famous story that I think that was in Bloomberg, where it's like people are not going to own their own house, or really they're not going to own they're not going to own records. Like you're not going to have an album in your house that you can put on the record player. You're going to have a license on, you know, iCloud, and you get to play that music as long as that license is valid, right? You're not going to own anything. You're just going to have this kind of like constant subscription service for every aspect of your life. And the people that own the things, they're going to profit. And it ain't gonna be you.
So I'm really glad that you brought this future up, because I think there are a lot of techno utopians out there, and even sort of left UBI theorists and, you know, technocratic left liberals who think that we can get to a world resembling socialism just by good policy, just by people voting the right way. We don't need to overthrow the bourgeoisie. We don't need to change the social relations. We're just going to, you know, gradually transition to the best of all possible worlds. And I think we can see from looking around us that is not fucking true, right? Like reforms are good, but at the end of the day, like we have to change the basic social relationships that our society runs on if we don't want to slide into the rentism future.
Well, I think for me, it's so obvious. It's like, you know, what amount of money is Jeff Bezos going to reach in personal wealth where he goes, all right, I won the game. Now I'm going to spend 100% of my new wealth on helping people and building up housing and providing for, like, there's no number. If he has $1 trillion, he's going for $2 trillion. You know, like
there'll never be enough.
It'll never happen. It'll never transition. So these people are constantly playing the game to increase the amount of wealth they have and the absolute relative wealth as well.
And power.
And exactly.
But I think an important aspect of that, though, is like it's because the fact that the market is it's I think, you know, in some element, I think Nietzsche was right in that, you know, God is no longer the predominant factor in people's lives. You know, like the church is not. What it is now is the market. Market has replaced God in the world. And and the market is the omnipresent, all-powerful thing that everyone is subsumed under. So the reason why even the ultra-rich have to maintain and continue getting richer is because if they don't, they will be because they are subject to the market. They have to keep going on. They have to. Everyone in the system, although they're on the opposing side, must continue because they're at the dictatorship of the market.
Yeah, and capital has to continue growing, right? Like you might hear from some liberals who are like, well, why can't they just make enough to reproduce themselves, and why does it have to accumulate? That's literally how society functions. If the economy stops growing, it's like a shark. Like it has to keep on moving, or it's going to be thrown into crisis. And that's how the system works. And if capitalists fail to compete with other capitalists, they are going to be thrown back into the working class, because there are only two choices. You can either be an exploiter or you can be exploited. I guess you could say co-ops or like something of an exception to that. But like, trust me, I run a co-op right now. Co-ops are not the answer. Well, they're not for everyone.
Well, you know, you know, that you remind Zizek, you know, whenever someone says stuff like co-ops or as a solution to everything, I do get some Zizekian quotes that pop to mind where he's like, I don't want to go to meetings for every fucking thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't give a shit what toilet paper you're picking. Like, leave me out of it. I want some authority just so I don't have to worry about every little thing. I don't need to have a vote on the storm drain system. Okay, like that's fine.
I mean, look, if we had the power to move ourselves to like some kind of Richard Wolfian co-op world where everything is either a government-run enterprise or co-op, like, why not take it all the way? Why not abolish the value form? We will still have on some level a market economy where these co-ops have to compete with one another and people will wind up exploiting themselves and it will be subject to the same crises of overproduction. So as long as we're thinking big, I think maybe given that all of these things are going to be incredibly difficult, why not take it all the way?
Yeah, you know, I think to defend Richard again a little bit, it would just be, you know, it's just the idea of trying something, some sort of incremental thing that you can get a hold of. You know, if you could control a firm, you can change it into a co-op. Is kind of like a conceivable step that one group of people could take. You know, the idea that I could overturn global capitalism is pretty, you know, unlikely, and I'm just like waiting for something, but. You know, I could organize a firm in a way that none of the people involved were, you know, exploited as much as possible. Yeah. You know, it's the same thing with like a trade union, right? Like we all recognize that organizing collectively to take over this Starbucks franchise and make sure my salary is, you know, $24 instead of $12. You know, that's not going to end capitalism, but it's an incremental thing that I can do that I can see in the world and possibly reach with individual or group, you know, small collective effort. That's you know, why. I think that's why people do that, right?
It's also a nice thought experiment to get people thinking because class consciousness is so low right now in this country. Although, you know, maybe not as low as we think it is because we saw an actual insurrection last summer, which I believe was the single most important event or series of events in many years in terms of the class struggle. You know, people want to talk about the Bernie campaign and that's fine. But you didn't see anyone burning down a police station for Bernie Sanders.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, I think I told Jamie this, and this is probably a hot take, but I'm of the opinion, and I do sincerely believe that in terms of the most important things that happened this past decade, I would argue that, you know, not necessarily the organization, but everything in terms of the movement that would represent Black Lives Matter, and then things regarding police, you know, reform and abolition and what happened this past summer. I think that did significantly more for advancing a kind of understanding of what needs to occur in this country and like advancing class struggle than the Sanders campaign. And to be clear, I was a Sanders supporter and I do like Bernie Sanders, but I think that it got more at the core as to what is the fundamental antagonistic relationship in our society.
You know, so my belief is I agree with that actually. However, I would say that they build from one another, right? It's like a continuum of the Bernie Sanders campaign ended, and there was just this total spinning apart of like of energy. Like, what are we supposed to put it in? And then those events occurred, and so newly organized and newly radicalized people could grab a hold on to something and start making demands and start doing so outside of a framework that was being led by some guy and do it spontaneously in their local communities and you know, they didn't have to think like, oh, I'm representing Bernie Sanders campaign, right? It was like, this is what my community needs. I'm pissed off. We're protesting. We're making demands. And, you know, I totally agree that was really important. And in fact, what I would recommend for people is there's this, a group called All Gas, No Brakes by Andrew Callahan, I think is his name. And his old show, he went to Minneapolis and was there, you know, during the protests and the riots and talked to people that were like at the Target or at the police station. And that was one of the best pieces of media actually covering, you know, the unrest that I saw anywhere, which is it wasn't some sort of produced NBC reporter standing 100 meters away from a burning building in the background or talking to a cop spokesperson. It was actually a guy going and talking to the people, expressing their rage and talking about the problems of society. And when you saw that, you understood the class dynamic. You understood the pressure of capitalism was exerting and why so much of this was related to that.
Yeah, and how race and class combine,
yeah.
especially in this particular country. You know, I mean, there's people out there who are like, oh, well, if you don't talk about anything, if you talk about anything but class, then you're doing Marxism wrong. But that does a disservice to Marx, because Marxism is not just the study of bosses and workers. Yes, that is the central relationship that all society runs on, but it is also the study of social relations. And race is a social relation that is tied to class as well. So if you leave that part out, you're not going to have a very good analysis of what's going on with American capitalism at all. I think it's also important, and this is a huge part of why I valued it so highly, that this uprising, to the degree that it was led by anyone, it was led by Black proletarians. And I think any kind of attempt at a revolution in this country is going to have to heavily involve the Black proletariat if it wants any chance at succeeding, not because of some liberal nonsense like Black people are magic, right? Because of the unique material position occupied by the Black proletariat in this country. And that's not to say that that's definitely how it's going to happen, but it's not surprising to me that that's the door that this is coming in through.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's totally accurate. I mean, it's not an accident that the most radical and most pervasive influence on left politics in this country for the past, probably since until very recently, was the Black Panther Party. Like it had such a gigantic influence, and yet was such a small group of people was over a small period of time, and because of what Jamie just said.
I look at this and there's one note I should make with the all gas no brakes is, in fact, Andrew himself, who's now on a show called Channel 5, because he had some sort of development deal and the company tried to steal, and they did steal the all gas no brakes name. So this great reporting being done on the ground, that brand or whatever was stolen by the guy who actually created it. By somebody who got a development contract when he was 21 and gave, he wasn't aware, didn't have the wherewithal. So now he's changed to a new show called Channel 5, and it's just another example of how these relations work in the particular. Like, you can show these individual people and how they're affected. And I think that's the big problem that the American left has right now, Jamie, is that for the longest time, the working classes have been divided by these racial dynamics, right? Like, most white people are poor, or workers. They're not the capital owning class, but the capital owning class is white. And they've used that, I've heard it described before as the racial bribe. And this is not a controversial idea, but basically the idea is you don't give white people wealth or capital that are poor. You give them a racial status, and then you constantly have that racial status be under threat.
Yeah, and you don't give Black proletarians wealth either. Of course, you give them the politics of representation, saying, "Oh, hey, maybe if you work really hard and don't complain about your boss and you don't complain about racism, you could be president too someday," which is obviously fucking nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. And well, and so how we bridge that gap, and build that, cross-racial movement that, acknowledges and understands that in America, race is also a class signifier, right? Like, someone who's Black, it doesn't matter how much money they actually have. They are coded as poor.
Well, it used to be baked into the law itself, right?
Yes.
Like, you could tell the condition of someone's labor by what they looked like on the outside. If somebody appeared to be of African descent, their labor was not free. they were participating in this slave society. So it really, and that wasn't even that long ago. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, yeah, and you know, I think a lot of people like to refer to like the slave period that ended in 1865 as if that was the end of bondage in America, and it wasn't. You know, we transitioned to a completely, you could see a smooth transition between the debt peonage of sharecropping and actual slavery. It was often the same exact people and working for the exact same family, where they went from being officially owned to heavily indebted and working for the people that used to own them, right? So yeah, that didn't end. That didn't end until this century, or I'm sorry, within the last 100 years, I should say. And we still have those kind of conditions redeveloping, where people, I was going to cover a story before you guys hopped on, but didn't get to it, about how Bloomberg just put out an article celebrating the idea of maybe we should build company towns as a solution.
Yeah, I saw that. Holy shit.
As a solution to housing crisis,
Literally the thing that's worry-free from sorry to bother you. This is happening.
Well, and there was also a move that was in Nevada. I didn't know if you guys saw this a few months ago, where they were going to create basically libertarian zones where companies would be able to get control of a county and then be the government. Like the corporation would own the territory and it would be only subject to the state government. It would be totally free from local control, local democracy. And
what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? It was defeated at the last minute. But this was a Democratic governor who proposed this idea. And through a revolt within the ranks, they managed to foil it, because when people heard that, they were like, what? So we have these ideas, and I mentioned the Knights of Labor before, because these concepts that we had to organize our way out, because we don't have the institutional strength among the left, we don't have the this is historical knowledge that I have. It's not experience. We're going to go through and rebuild company towns. We're going to have Scrit. We're going to call those Amazon gift cards. And the same stuff is being
Amazon
proposed.
coin. You can use cryptocurrency for that.
Oh, boy.
Oh, sure. Crypto is another example of that, right? And so this rentier society, the extermination society is certainly on the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, this is where liberalism leads, and a belief that, if we just have competent technocrats in charge of managing the state and managing the economy, bringing all these classes into the conversation together, sitting down and having a beer. Remember the beer summit? Then, we'll end up with the best of all possible worlds. The workers are going to stay in their proper place, but they'll live a decent life, keep things chugging along. The poor will have just enough to get by. The rich will still be rich, and their position is justified. I mean, this is a problem that I had with, not a problem, like a disagreement that I had with what AOC said when she was talking about her dress, right?
Yes.
Saying we need to bring all classes into the conversation.
No.
And that really is so that we can have a society that works for everyone, right? And that really stuck out to me, because we are doing Lenin's State and Revolution right now, in fact, on Everybody Loves Communism.
Yep.
We got a new episode coming out next week, and then every week subsequently. But Lenin talks about these two different distortions of reality, the people that he's dealing with. So one, you have like the Kautskyite, democratic socialists, parliamentary road to socialism, whatever you want to call them. They're kind of gaslighty, because they accept Marx's basic premises, and they're like, you can't resolve the contradictions between classes. These are irreconcilable. They can only be resolved in socialism. But the way you get to socialism is doing a bunch of lib shit. We think there's this peaceful parliamentary road where, nobody ever has to get hurt, which is, I wish it were true, not true. Then going even further to the right, you have the liberals who are like, no, yeah, we can bring all classes into the conversation. It's the role of the bourgeois state to manage and even resolve these contradictions so that everyone stays in their proper place and we can keep things chugging along. And Lenin says, no, that's not true. Sorry, AOC. apologies. I think you're a good person. I think you probably mean well, but you're wrong about this. The bourgeois state, its role is it cannot ever resolve these contradictions. All it can do is manage them in favor of the status quo, which is to say, in favor of the current hierarchy in order to keep things from spilling over. The only way you can actually resolve these contradictions is in revolution, by overthrowing the bosses. And there's a lot of things that can happen between here and there. Obviously, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but at the end of the day, you still have to take that final step.
Yeah, and I think an important aspect of that is like to be clear what we mean by like, the state cannot manages these things. It's that if let's look at our society, America, right? And it's like the American Constitution at its core has private property as a first class right. How can you possibly reform your way to have it to making private property not being an aspect of the fundamental aspect of society, if that is like at the bedrock and the foundational ideological project of this country? Like you can't. The only way is to fundamentally rearrange, like not just a political revolution, we need a social revolution, right? And we need to have a total reimagining of society. Now, how we get there is still, much to be determined, and hopefully you can join us on this journey in the podcast, but also organizing is the path to doing that. That's the only way we can go doing that. Like, you need to have theory, but you also need praxis.
Mm-hmm. Praxis. That's praxis. The magic word.
Yeah. When I think about state and revolution, or exactly the tension between, the reformist path, I don't think that the reformist path actually gets you anywhere. It's sort of like busy work that you're doing to try to marginally increase the power of the working class materially, and that's kind of what's on the table. And that revolution is something that I can't manufacture. It's just it's conditions that will arise naturally due to the contradictions inherent in capitalism. And I don't know if that really makes any sense, but we see with Lenin in particular, I know what revolution means. I know what revolution means. I think a lot of people, when they use the phrase revolution, maybe they don't, you may basically explained it, which is the idea that we can get somewhere without people being hurt. That's not going to happen. There's going to be people that fight tooth and nail to defend the status quo. And it won't matter if we have a Democratic majority or not, and I use that small d, that doesn't matter if the Democratic will is in favor of changing stuff. If these statuses are under threat, these people will actually reject democracy. They will reject.
Well, they'll do it regardless. Whether or not we're moving towards kind of like what we're talking about, moving it towards society, there will be fight, like you're saying, look at what happened January 6th. Look at what happens with it's important to remember the police are people who are from America, right? It's in America, the police are still members of the society. They're just people who you see out and about in the street when they're not on duty. They are fundamentally attacking other people in this country as well. That this is what we mean by it's like if people will continue fighting to maintain the status quo as you described, or a more reactionary order.
Well, yeah, that's why I mentioned earlier with the concerns about the right, because I think it is like mainstreaming in our conversation is the fascist reaction, which is kind of like, who cares if a majority of people think something? They're not worth listening to. Like, they're lesser than, they're immigrants, they're minorities, they're socialists. They're not legitimate. It doesn't matter if they win or not. Like, they're gonna ruin the country. So
sorry, guys.
You gotta go.
No. I just got a call.
Yeah, no worries.
I could do a few more minutes. Sorry.
Yeah. We could do like 5 more if you guys are up for it.
Sure.
And the idea of democracy itself, I think, is losing legitimacy, which is it's obvious that America was never a democracy. I don't think any of us needs to go over that. Just the idea, though, that democracy is kind of a good idea is falling out of favor with a large portion of this country. And I do think that does represent a dangerous pivot point. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, it's like the Esther Taylor book, democracy doesn't exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone.
Yes.
Like, we know that this form of bourgeois democracy that we have right now is not truly democratic because there is no economic democracy. And, as Lenin says, it's not a reliable enforcer of the interests of the working class majority. It's just not, for so many different reasons. When you have a heavily propagandized population, when you have no power at work, when people are so depoliticized that all they think they can do is vote, and that means they're participating. But that said, obviously, it would be bad if a fascist came along and rolled it back even further. It would be bad if a king came along and it was like, hey, we're going to do a monarchy now. Like, there's all sorts of ways that it could get worse, but there are also ways that it could get better. And, I'm hoping there's a big debate, right, over whether these sort of bourgeois rights or these Enlightenment liberal values like, liberty, equality, fraternity, if these can ever be recuperated by the left or not. If you can say, oh, yeah, democracy, these things, but for real this time, or if this is still operating in a bourgeois framework and we just have to think purely collectively. Personally, I think that there should always be room for the individual. I think people will have better self-expression under communism. Look at what capitalism has done to art. Look at what it's done to the movies. It's fucking garbage. Jorge had a really good thread about this the other day. So I think maybe we can kind of thread that needle there and say, hey, do you really want to be fully self-actualized? Yeah, maybe we should reframe this kind of century of the self thinking about how, personal expression is be all end all of, progressive politics or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think the only way to really deliver on these promises that capitalist democracy failed to, is by advancing to the next phase.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. All right, guys, I appreciate you coming on. Why don't you throw out some plugs again and what your next projects are going to be and where people can find you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Our new show is called Everybody Loves Communism. It is available, hopefully, wherever podcasts are available. Just type it in your app. It'll pop right up. Also, we're experimenting. We're doing memberships through Fans FM for this one. We're probably going to do Patreon too, but we'll charge a little more on Patreon because Patreon takes way more of your money out. So it's like, all right, if you really want to use Patreon, you pay $1 more. Otherwise, go to fans.fm/Everybody Loves Communism, sign up as a patron and support the show. Because, it helps to be making some money and we really are working hard on it. It's a lot more work than doing a normal podcast. No shade on Twitch streamers, but it really is a ton of work. And we're trying to take our time with it because we want it to be an evergreen resource on leftist history and theory that people can refer to, forever, whenever they need some.
Yeah, sounds good.
And I think people on the left need to read a little more Marx. Sorry. But if you don't have time to read Marx, you can just listen to our podcast because we'll do the reading
it for
so you don't have to. All this force the vote shit, all these depoliticized people who just think we can force the vote our way to socialism. You got to read some Marx and then you won't think that anymore.
So yeah, definitely. I think if you could spend hours watching Twitch streamers, you might be able to find some time to listen to some theory from time to time. That would be a good investment. All right, Jorge, do you have anything? Don't be. I have my mods spamming in the chat some of the ways to find the show, but do you guys have any individual branding or social media accounts you want?
Yeah, well, you can follow me at @line_goes_down at twitter.com. That's my main social media that people can find me in. And you can, I as Jamie said, sometimes I have this tendency where I kind of just get into a certain mindset and I just would thread about something that's on my mind.
Good threads. Excellent threads. Everyone says you have the best threads.
It sounds like you guys have the impressions going too, so it'll be good.
Don't encourage us. But yeah, I also got the Antifada. Don't forget, patreon.com/the Antifada, or wherever you get your podcasts. We also got Twitch going, twitch.tv/the Antifada. We're actually going to stream a little bit later after this. And between this and that, I'm going to have therapy.
Yeah, and I do have one plug, and separately. So, I'm also on the international committee for DSA. There is an event happening on Monday.
Cool.
You could go to the international committee Twitter page for this event. But it's a really important event because basically it's about we're going to have Richard Wolff, we're going to have Vijay Prashad to talk about the importance of trying to combat anti-China work in terms of as an anti-imperialist thing that need to be happening, because we do not want to have a Cold War or any kind of conflict with China, because this is and that it was an important discussion, and you can check it out on, and it's gonna happen Monday. Go and you can look it up on the DSA International Committee Twitter.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming on, and I couldn't agree more about China. I had a rant yesterday about some sort of Taiwan propaganda that people were talking about. So I know that's a very important topic. So everyone definitely check out the DSA International Committee. Is that in New York? Or did it already happen?
This is oh, you mean like the event? You mean?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be online.
Oh, okay, cool. I will probably check that out for sure. I need some more talking points for pushing back against the China warmongers. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming on. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Let's see some DSA Jamies in the chat. And thank you guys for coming on. I appreciate it. I'll see you soon.
Man. Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime you want. Let me know. Bye-bye.
Hell yeah.
Bye.